Britain's largest company is leading an oil boom deep in the Andes. Tonight, World in Action investigates BP and how the company's drive for oil and profit has caused serious environmental damage to a fragile ecosystem. And for the first time, we reveal what happened when insiders warned BP its drilling operations were triggering earthquakes. This summer, we exposed a secret security network of ex-SAS soldiers hired by BP to train controversial Colombian security forces who are at war with left-wing guerrillas. And we revealed how local people who'd spoken out against the oil company were threatened and even killed by pro-government paramilitaries.
This is one of the 3 threats that was received early this morning in El Moro. What it says is that all the people involved in the El Moro Association have 30 days to stop their activities.
But tonight, we challenge BP's green image and ask if the oil company is guilty of environmental double standards. We show how the green oil giant has contaminated a fragile environment and ignored local warnings and laws.
I, David, Lord Simon of Highbury.
BP's former chairman, David Simon, becomes a lord and an influential member of Tony Blair's government. It marks an outstanding year for BP, whose share price and profits are up. Both BP and the government promised their concern for the environment would be reflected in their actions. At 300 miles off the Scottish mainland, these promises are being challenged by Greenpeace. Here in the Atlantic frontier, BP and other oil companies have been awarded government licenses to explore in an environmentally sensitive area.
Today, a judge ordered Greenpeace to stop disrupting BP's work, and the oil company later offered to drop the compensation claim if that order was obeyed.
We have no intention or desire to bankrupt Greenpeace. We're simply looking for ways to make them stop their unlawful actions.
Greenpeace says the Atlantic operation exposes the hypocrisy behind BP's green image.
Well, I think you've got to judge them on their actions, BP and the other oil companies. Well, they say they want to have no impact on the environment, but it's impossible to explore for oil in pristine frontier areas like the Atlantic, like the Arctic, and other areas around the world without having a serious environmental impact.
Thousands of miles away in the new frontier of eastern Colombia, BP is exploring in another fragile ecosystem. This £25 billion oil field is crucial to BP's success and reputation. The oil giant intends to stay in Colombia for the next 30 years to exploit this huge find.
This discovery here in Colombia is part of, and has formed part of our strategy to replace the reserves from the declining production in Alaska and the North Sea, and our strategy has always been to build, shall we say, a third leg to the significant production that we have. So it has been a successful part of our strategy.
BP's arrival in Colombia coincided with the redesign of its famous shield to emphasize the color green. Customers cannot escape this green makeover. BP also underlines this with a declaration of its global principles.
Our goals are no accidents, no harm to people, and no damage to the environment.
The standards that we set in Colombia are exactly the same standards that we set anywhere else in the world. In fact, the standards that we adhere to in Colombia are greater than the legal norm. I am judged, part of my salary actually depends on our environmental performance. Over 50% of my bonus is judged on how we do, and it affects everybody in the company as well.
World in Action went to Colombia to test BP's claims and examine the prospects for Mr. Meade's green Christmas bonus. BP has invested much time and money emphasizing its green intentions for the oil region of Casanare. Key Colombian officials and politicians have been entertained and educated in Britain at BP's expense. However, not all are convinced.
La EP puede ser buen vecino. Yo considero de que si la BP mantuviera los estándares.
I think that if BP were to maintain the same environmental and social standards it has in London, for example over oil spills and contamination, it would be a good neighbour.
De exploración, de operación, de derramamiento de crudo, de contaminación, etc.
At the moment, I can't say that they are a good neighbour.
In 1992, BP's Mr. Mead showed John Major around the heavily guarded operation. Ironically, the Prime Minister was on his way to the Earth Summit in Brazil to discuss environmental problems caused by, among others, the oil industry. Just before Mr. Major's arrival, the local health authority led by these two men had closed one BP well and intended to shut others. BP was operating without licenses, endangering the environment and risking public health. But the health inspectors came under pressure from their own government, which wanted BP's rigs to keep pumping oil.
I think closing the wells would not have been beneficial to many parties, including the national government, because it meant showing, for us, a realistic picture of what was happening in Casanare. But the state and BP wanted to keep it quiet.
Before Mr. Major's arrival, Saul Romero warned BP that a landslide at one badly placed rig could contaminate a nearby spring used as drinking water by locals and their cattle. BP's refusal to listen had dangerous results.
Time showed that they were wrong. We were right. One side of a toxic pool near the rig collapsed, spilling much of the waste and seriously polluting the nearby spring.
Soon after Mr. Major's visit, Saul Romero was moved from his post and left office. Defending the health of the community brought further personal cost.
We were threatened by different groups, but we do not know where the threats came from. We never took these threats into account, because what we were doing was not as an isolated group, but as representatives of the Casanare community.
BP arrived here full of green promises. Soon they were broken. A parallel investigation by local environmental regulators established a disturbing pattern to BP's behaviour. 2 months after Mr. Major's visit, the regulators charged BP on 10 counts of serious environmental damage at 5 oil rigs. These included violation of laws for protecting wild habitats and water resources, ground contamination and disposal of solid industrial waste, detrimental changes to the riverbed and extinction of some river life, exploration work likely to cause serious deterioration to natural resources and the environment. BP had violated environmental laws on a regular basis in 1991. Its lawyers argued that the damage had been non-existent or minor, but the regulator said BP's defence was not accompanied by any demonstration or scientific evidence to support their claim. The company, which had gone into Colombia trumpeting the highest green standards, was fined $215,000, the biggest ever environmental fine in Colombian history.
That performance is and meets internationally acceptable standards. That yes, there have been impacts, but those impacts are totally reversible and we have made no major ecosystem impact.
Even though you've attracted the biggest ever environmental fine in the history of Colombia.
But again, the money is not the issue. We will always strive to improve our environmental performance. That is the goal of the company, and we are committed to that. I'm personally committed to that. If that was not the case, then I wouldn't be working with BP.
The current environmental regulator in Casanare told World in Action it is underfunded, understaffed, and reliant on BP for information and equipment. This forces local communities like this one at El Morro to play an important but dangerous role in monitoring BP. El Morro is a farming community inside BP's newest oil field and depends on clean mountain springs for survival.
Permanentemente suceden incidentes.
Environmental incidents of varying degrees are consistently taking place. And if the local community is not keeping an eye on all areas where BP operates, absolutely nothing happens. The local community takes a lead in reporting these environmental incidents. And if they're not on their toes, the authorities get no incident reports.
But local vigilance of BP comes at a price too high for many to pay. Members of the community have been killed, threatened, harassed and falsely imprisoned by the Colombian authorities, simply for protesting against BP's operations. Weeks before we filmed this year in Colombia, this rig, Florenius C, was shut down for water contamination, illegal deforestation and spilling toxic waste. It is one of 4 BP rigs suspended in the last 2 years for environmental damage. Once again, BP had been warned.
Many people from many villages complained to me as environmental representative of the El Morro Community Association that we should do something.
Soon after the rig's closure, Laureano says 2 men threatened to kill him if he and others did not stop the campaign. An official investigation was recently closed without conclusion.
The 2 men said I had played a major role in the closure of Florenius C and told me I had to leave the area because my life was at risk. I told them that I was not against the community, but for it.
We know of community leaders who have been told that if they don't stop upsetting BP or campaigning against it, they will have to leave or be killed. BP are not making these threats, but there are certain armed people who do it in BP's name.
Ciertas personas armadas a nombre de la BP.
This eminent American geologist is also worried about BP's rigs, but for very different reasons. We've investigated a dispute between Jerry Szymanski and BP, with wide-reaching implications for the people of Casanare. Szymanski warned BP that its drilling operations were triggering earthquakes, but says senior managers ignored his evidence. In 1992, BP contracted Szymanski's company Track as part of a $3 million project to assess the risks to its oil wells from earthquake and fault activity. Szymanski, who worked closely with a BP scientist, soon established that the company was developing its sprawling oil field in an area more active than the San Andreas fault.
Well, what has happened here, what you are seeing, is a geological record of a very large earthquake. By looking at the amount of displacement here, you can see that it was a very sizable shock.
In 1994, Track produced this 3-volume report for BP, which clearly identified the risks. Szymanski says the response of Phil Meade and other BP managers was extremely cool.
BP did not react at all to our findings, and my impression was that they viewed us as basically troublemakers, as messengers which are bringing the bad news.
It was a cornerstone to the work that we're doing. It was a very, very thorough and a very, very good report.
They say that you dismissed their report out of hand.
No, that is
that you listened to them, you listened politely, and that you didn't take it on board.
No, that is incorrect, because we have actually adopted many of the techniques that they suggested in the report. For instance, all of our facilities are designed to withstand earthquakes.
This doesn't square with a BP letter in November 1994 in which the oil company told Track that
Much of the information provided to us by TRAC is irrelevant to our work.
Yet nearly half of TRAC's report dealt with the highly sensitive subject of how BP's drilling operations were triggering earthquakes in Casanare.
There is a very substantial enhancement of seismic activity or earthquake activity by oil field development operation like drilling, testing of wells, pumping, injecting the gases, etc. This is actually quite known phenomenon. It is known as induced seismicity. It happens in many fields. What is surprising here is the intensity of it.
The TRAC report concluded that there is convincing evidence that well activity, including pumping and gas injection, is triggering small earthquakes in large areas surrounding wells. The report also warned that the short-term hazard can increase substantially, and therefore BP's drilling operations must be carefully monitored. BP dismissed the risks of earthquake triggering as defined by TRAC. However, they continue to monitor earthquake activity in Casanare.
The monitoring stations are still there. We still monitor seismicity in the area. What we have done is transfer that monitoring over to a local Colombian company.
That monitoring is being done outside BP's oil field. And the company responsible for this monitoring told us that they were not looking specifically at how BP's drilling operations might be triggering earthquakes in the field. BP says it has made its operations safe and that the risks to the wells are limited and manageable. It says the real risks taken by BP and its partners, which include the state oil company Petrol, are business ones.
The risk that is being taken is actually a commercial risk, and it's a commercial risk that we share with both our partners and with Petrol, and it's something that's been analysed jointly with our partners as well.
But Szymanski and BP insiders consulted by World in Action are worried that BP has failed to work out the real risks in such an active fault and earthquake zone. They say that BP is sitting on a time bomb. Casanare has suffered 3 big natural earthquakes since January 1995.
We would be willing and welcome debates with BP on the basic results. I think that they are sufficiently worth it, sufficiently alarming for them to take notice.
In Casanare, most people get their water from the local rivers and natural springs. One local authority says it has received over 300 complaints that BP's activities have irreversibly affected their natural water supply. The area generating widespread local anxiety is La Tablona, a nature reserve and the principal water source for 50,000 people. World in Action saddled up to investigate why BP wants to sink 6 new wells in such an important nature reserve. We discovered BP is already under government investigation for possible illegal exploration there.
The area that we worked in was farmland, and we believe that the work, which was only about 5 kilometers of seismic, caused no damage whatsoever.
This 1995 Colombian government report included strong criticism of the environmental damage caused by BP's operation in La Tablona. It said BP's deforestation had caused a serious environmental impact, erosion by landslides, water contamination, and damage to roads and bridges. Local concern about BP's plans for La Tablona forced a public inquiry. But this BP marker is a reminder that the green oil giant could be back.
We wanted to see, how could you still preserve La Tablona as a reserve for water sourcing Yopal, but at the same time look at the possibility of doing exploration activity in La Tablona. We initiated a study with environmental organizations, and that study was passed to the Environmental Ministry about 6 months ago. We are still waiting for permission to carry on.
BP commissioned this study only after it came under investigation. BP paid $110,000 to a local small business centre to oversee the work. The director told us BP was happy to learn that the boundaries had been redrawn and that its proposed exploration site was no longer considered to be inside the nature reserve. Local regulators also say BP has buried a toxic time bomb in Casanare. These official photos from 1992 show how toxic waste from BP's rigs was dumped in the ground and covered up. Following local pressure, BP lined some pits with degradable plastic sheets. In Colombia, there is no law controlling the burial of toxic oil waste. The local environmental regulator told us that BP had taken advantage of this and dumped their toxic waste irresponsibly. Saul Romero took Weldon action to other areas where toxic waste, known as drill cuttings, has been buried and covered up. He's worried the buried toxic waste will leak and contaminate the underground water supply.
We can see here behind us the area designated by the company for solid waste products from drilling, including substances with a health risk, which are highly contaminating when they are not treated properly.
We buried all waste in line pits, and we monitor outside of those line pits to make sure there is no leakage. By the end of June this year, the technology that we have introduced into Casanare, which is both bioremediation and thermal desorption, will have reduced the need to bury cuttings by 97%. So in fact, in the future, we will not do that.
Weldon Action has learned the local environmental regulator recently launched an investigation into the whereabouts of these toxic pits.
Well, we must know where we are because we bury the cuttings there, and we also have the monitoring stations around them. What we don't have is an exact map, but we certainly know where they are.
The regulator has told BP to locate and treat its buried toxic waste. They are concerned that the lining of these pits will deteriorate within 10 years. BP arrived in Casanare saying it would earn local trust by responding to environmental and social expectations. But some community leaders suspect that BP's actions owe more to public relations than to serious environmental commitment.
Unfortunately, BP and most other companies are not preventative, but reactive, as you say. They wait until things happen in order to take steps. But when it is a matter of people's health, we cannot wait around for people to fall ill or die in order to take measures.
Well, BP seems to take the view that frontier areas, as long as they are going to be licensed by governments, are open to them to exploit as much as they can, as quickly as they can, and to get as much out of as they can.
Every person in BP is committed to no environmental damage. It makes absolutely no sense. Commercial success and environmental performance go hand in hand. It makes no sense for us to operate in an area and damage the environment.
The first part of our investigation into BP in Colombia focused on the private security company DSL. After the program, DSL was fined for illegally bringing in security advisors under tourist visas. Its secret training of the Colombian police is now under government investigation. And BP's contract with the Colombian army was recently declared unconstitutional by by Colombia's Human Rights Ombudsman.